Good evening and welcome. I'm Beth Well, Director of Development for University Libraries. And on behalf of Dean Tom McNally and all of us at University Libraries, we're so glad you could choose to join us tonight. It's great to see some of our wonderful library donors, as well as many of our friends of University Library members attending tonight's program. At this time, we'd like to ask you to please make sure that you've turned off your microphone and cameras as we begin the presentation. So if everyone's ready, let's venture into Piranesi's world, mapping the architectural imagination. Jeannie, shall we begin?
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Beth, and thank you to everybody who's joined us this evening. So my name is Jeannie Britton, and I'm curator in the Rare Books Department and in the Irvin Department of Rare Books and Special Collections. And I co-curated this exhibit with my partner in crime, Zoe Langer, who is a postdoctoral fellow on the NEH fellowship devoted to the Digital Piranesi project. So the title of our exhibition is Piranesi's Worlds, Mapping the Architectural Imagination. So who is Piranesi and why have an exhibit devoted to his worlds and his works? Well, Piranesi was an Italian artist in the middle of the 18th century. USC is uniquely poised to celebrate and share his works because we're one of very few institutions to own a complete set of his posthumous works, his collected works that were published after his death in 1778. 2020 marked the tricentennial of his birth in 1720, and of course, fall 2020 didn't work out the way anybody had been planning. So we're opening the exhibit now, and I'm thrilled to say that it will be up through October of 2021, when we can celebrate the 301st birthday of Piranesi. He was born October 4th, 1720. So another reason that we're having this exhibit is to introduce the digital project that's funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities called the Digital Piranesi. And I'll be sharing some elements of that project that are integrated into the physical exhibit. So this virtual tour that we'll be giving, and I'll start and then I'll hand things over to Zoe, who will continue the second half of the tour. This virtual tour is kind of a strange medium. So I decided to try to hit a couple of notes as we proceed. On one hand, I want to, of course, share the material that we're sharing in the physical cases in the gallery, but I also want to give a sense of what the exhibit looks like in person, and importantly, to share some of the digital supplements, the digital elements of the physical exhibit. So I'll proceed, and this is, I don't know, maybe a little bit silly, but this is the walk into the Irvin department, into the Hollings Library, into the Britton Gallery. And we have a very large panel that we're proud of announcing the exhibit, Piranesi's Worlds, Mapping the Architectural Imagination. And what we intend to do with this title is first kind of relate to one of Piranesi's really suggestive quotes that I'll come back to in just a minute, and to consider the idea of maps and mapping, both literally and figuratively. So throughout the exhibit, of course, there are lots of maps, but we also want to encourage viewers to think about a map as a kind of challenge, a representation of three-dimensional space on a flat piece of paper. And this is something that Piranesi struggles with a lot, trying to get lots and lots of information onto one single sheet. And we'll have lots of evidence of that as we move forward. This is one of the most amazing things that I'm so glad we got on the wall in the Britton Gallery. So the first theme of 6 in the exhibit is imaginary cartography. Cartography is usually thought of as an objective, rational medium. For Piranesi, cartography was one of many methods of artistic and creative expression. This map on the wall is huge. It's called an ichnographia. And what he does with this map is he presents not only excessive and meticulous detail. You can see the Pantheon, you can see the island in the middle of the river, but he's also presenting his own imaginative reconstruction of what he thinks a section of Rome looked like in antiquity. Now, he participated in archaeological digs. He was...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but no one is able to see your the images that you're discussing, if you could just share your presentation.
Oh no, oh no, oh no, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Oh, how did that happen? Oh dear, oh dear. Ah, there we go. Okay. All right. I'm sharing now, I think.
Yes, thank you.
All right, I'm so sorry. All right, well, here's what you missed. Hold on. All right, so we saw this, right? Okay. And then we walk into the gallery and it's a dramatic reveal of the title of the exhibit. And then all right, let me see if I can minimize that. And so then this is the exhibition title, and then this is the image I'm talking about. So this is the wildly creative ichnographia. I hope everybody can see this now. That Piranesi uses he makes it look like an objective piece of material evidence. You can see their metal clamps holding what looks like an ancient marble slab on a wall. He's trying to make this map look like a real piece of material evidence. But what he's doing is he's expressing his own really individualistic and creative, imaginative view of an ancient section of Rome. And so what Piranesi does is he takes some of the traditional conventions of cartography and the developing new conventions of cartography, and he puts them to different ends in his maps and in his other works as well. So I'll just move through these images pretty quickly. This is a map of Rome from the early 17th century that has the key at the bottom that we're familiar with now, identifying monuments. Piranesi takes that kind of traditional convention to an extreme in a map that Zoe will be talking about. This is a very important map for Piranesi and for the history of map making. This is by Giambattista Noli, who was a friend and collaborator of Piranesi's. Piranesi contributed the views that are around the margin of the central map image there. And Noli really made maps look the way that we're familiar with today. And I'll just say quickly that this is from a really fascinating collection of maps of European cities that was collected by Charles Pinckney, one of the early governors of South Carolina. Two more of his maps are also included in the exhibition. This is our introductory panel, and I just want to share from this Piranesi's fantastic quote: "If I had the opportunity to create a world, I would be mad enough to do it." And in a number of his works, we can see both that creativity, that pride, and a little hint of what a lot of people called his madness. So these images just give a sense of how the gallery looks, and they give us an opportunity to brag about the amazing things that people do in digital collections with extremely high resolution scans. These images are gorgeous, both from the distance that these pictures were taken from and when you get close up. It's astounding to see them this big, and it just makes me so happy. So I'll look at these one more time. Another theme in the exhibition is imaginary worlds. So Piranesi is not a common name. He's not like, I don't know, Renoir or Michelangelo, but if he's known at all, if people know his name, it's for one of two reasons, and I'll talk about both: his imaginary prisons, which are part of this theme, and his views of Rome. Piranesi's imaginary prisons were a series of pretty erratic and furious looking etchings. They were not popular when he first released them in the 1740s, when he was in his 20s. He returned to them almost 20 years later and reprinted them in the 1760s. They're easy to dismiss as a kind of one-off strange outlier when you consider the rest of his body of work. But for him to return to them really suggests that they meant something important to him. They were unpopular in the 18th century, but very popular in the 19th century, especially with American and European second generation romantic authors. So I'll just list these names: Edgar Allan Poe, Charles Baudelaire, Thomas de Quincey, are all fairly big names of 19th century literature, and they were all either directly or indirectly influenced by Piranesi's prisons. So I want to take you into this image here, the Gothic Arch, a title that was assigned later. This is the scan of the image. And then what I want to do here is share one of the digital elements of the exhibit. I hope this video works well, because this takes you into the full series of his prisons. I think it's 19 images. So by scanning the QR code that's included in the case, viewers can scroll through all of the prisons. It's amazing to have just one of these. We're lucky that the Columbia Museum of Art generously loaned us the one that's framed on the wall. Having the complete series is a really special thing, and being able to share them this way is just truly exciting, I think. So you can see from these images that they're really dark, Gothic, shadowy, kind of cryptic. They look like a series of underground torture chambers. It's not, happy stuff, but what they suggested for Piranesi and what they really suggested for the next generation of artists was the power of the imagination, restraints on the imagination, and its potential power and its force. Oh, sorry, let me jump ahead. So the other reason that people might be familiar with Piranesi today is his another series, his Views of Rome. These are large scale, heavily annotated and highly detailed images of ancient Roman monuments and the contemporary 18th century city. They're really remarkable artifacts. And what you can see in this image is his annotation style. So in the little captions on the bottom left and right, he's identifying aspects of the Colosseum, of this structure. What our digital project does is it renders these annotations as live hyperlinks. These texts are usually objective, and these are all in Italian. We're maintaining the original language and providing translations elsewhere. What the annotations in this image show are the seating areas for different social classes in ancient Rome. And so this is nothing new for historians. That information on its own isn't that valuable or new or exciting. The fact that Piranesi insists on providing it, though, I think is important, because this is a really fascinating image that provides a kind of illusion that makes you think, oh, what if I could fly above the Colosseum and still see all of its detail? And then he provides that other layer of factual detail that breaks the illusion of visual art. He goes even further with his final work. This was published with the help of his son after his death, or in the same year that he died, 1778. This is a study of the ancient Greek colony of Paestum on the west coast of Italy. And so I'm going to jump ahead to the scan here. And this is where I'll conclude with another few slides that show how far he takes the convention of the key in his annotated views. He also does something similar in one of his annotated maps. So here you can see already, and these are just screenshots from the digital project. You can see already that the key there is much more elaborate. It's a long narrative text. And so here we still see some objective information. These captions were originally written in French, a language Piranesi didn't speak. I could talk about that in the Q&A if anyone's interested. But what he starts doing here is really just going on and on. He starts talking about the nature of art, the genius of the artist who knows when to follow the rules of architecture and when to break them. And so these texts, I think, are really crucial in the history of 18th century aesthetics, in discussions of information display and the history of art. But for a long time, these texts have been really almost impossible to find, and they've been neglected, I think, in the history of Piranesi and art historical scholarship. So we're very excited to be able to share this material. So I will conclude now and stop sharing my screen and hand things over to Zoe.
Hello, I'm Zoe, and just to briefly introduce myself again, I'm the postdoctoral fellow on the Digital Piranesi project. Hopefully. So moving right along in our whirlwind tour, this is another theme of our exhibition called Mapping Information. And so this theme really focuses on the ways that Piranesi anticipates digital media and the visual representation of information. So if you thought that the key and index were elaborate in the things that we've already seen, well, this map of Rome, you can see the index of over 400 items, quite literally and materially engulfs the map. And this index not only refers to monuments that are on the map itself, but also moves across geographical space as well as the space of the entire collection of volumes by Piranesi. So it refers not only to specific places, but also images of those places that Piranesi published, and also across other volumes. And so here in the exhibition, we tried to kind of represent that and represent how that works. And so these are just a couple on the left, you see the smaller views, are just a couple of images that are referred to in the index and in the map. And here we have a little video demonstration kind of showing you how this actually works. And this is on the Digital Piranesi site. So this focuses just on one annotation and leads you sort of through this labyrinth of images, maps, and really just you can see how Piranesi takes the representation of information and cartography to a completely new level. So here it's a highly interactive platform that we have on Digital Piranesi. And so you can click on the actual monument, which here is the temple of Cibele. I use the Italian word, but Cibele, I think. And beyond just the image, then you get linked to also the other annotations. So it's just linking from annotation to annotation and just this network of information that details every aspect of every image. So not only are you getting the location of this temple, but every single visual aspect about it, its ruins, but every single detail, archaeological detail that you could ever possibly want to know. So here, this kind of the way that this map anticipates digital media in the way of hyperlinks and through the annotations, multiple windows or tabs. We can also see this used in Piranesi's more archaeological prints. And this image is a print of the tomb of Cecilia Metella. It's one of the ancient tombs on the Appian Way in Rome. And to Piranesi, this tomb represented the magnificence of Roman engineering. In this particular case, it's actually a really huge tomb, and sometimes Piranesi uses perspective to sort of exaggerate the dimensions of monuments to the point that travelers and tourists would say, like Goethe, for example, the German philosopher, they would be disappointed when they actually saw the tomb in real life, would say, well, it's not as big as it looks in Piranesi's engravings. But in this particular case, it actually is true because I have visited it and it is enormous. And so here in this image below, you can see just a huge block of text. And here Piranesi describes his kind of more of his work as an archaeologist. He describes, excavations and digs, and he describes, I wanted to understand, how did they build this massive tomb? And he says, I visited the ancient ruins of Rome every single day, studying all their fragments, all their parts, and I just couldn't understand how they could possibly build this tomb that seems to be built more by nature than by art. And so this particular image, he's sort of working through that process of understanding Roman engineering. And you can see here that if you look closely on the left, in the middle, and the right, that there's that same kind of visual strategy of using multiple windows to kind of explain visually how this tomb was constructed. And so here, this is another one of our aspects of how we kind of make Piranesi's worlds and engravings come to life. This is a video in which we're animating kind of this relationship between image and text. And so I'll just play this short one again, but you can see all those different windows. And the way that he describes figuring out the sort of mystery of Roman construction is through this large block that you see in the center here. And he says, suddenly they appeared before my eyes and everything made sense. I understood what I didn't understand for many years. And so in these different windows, which are much like, tabs on your, when you click on, Safari or Explorer, each of these actually represent Piranesi's imaginative reconstruction of how the tomb was built and all of the tools that the ancient Romans would have used. So now, so we've sort of seen Piranesi in all these different roles, and Piranesi's, though he might have primarily been considered an artist, now that's become reevaluated in scholarship, and you've seen him as a kind of cartographer, publisher, bookmaker, creator of imaginary worlds, archaeologist, but he himself considered himself to be first and foremost an architect. And in virtually all of his engravings and works, he signs his name, Piranesi Architetto, so Piranesi architect. And so Vitruvius, here we're seeing two very rare 16th century editions of Vitruvius, 10 books of architecture, which was really a primary source for Piranesi in both his theory and practice of architecture, as it were, for many early modern and 18th century architects. This one is from the 1520s, and this is actually the first Italian translation and first translation of Vitruvius into a modern language. And both of these editions, as you can see here, are fully illustrated and annotated. And in this particular edition, the annotations are actually quite contentious and quite often disagree with Vitruvius, as well as the commentator and translator, which you can see Vitruvius's text on the left page is the sort of small paragraph in the bigger font, and then the commentary kind of surrounds that. And here is an image of the architectural orders. And then this other 16th century edition that we have is really interesting because it was actually owned by an architect, George Aitchison, who was the designer of Leighton House to the Victorian artist Frederick Lord Leighton. And so these kinds of rare editions that we have in our collection are really, the annotations are just evidence of how these types of books were used in architectural practice and were actually used by architects. And so in this particular drawing here, what we're seeing is a kind of way or guide to how to represent a building in an architectural drawing. So we see three types of perspectival projections and sort of architectural blueprints. And one of those, what Vitruvius calls the orthographia, is actually a cross section that Piranesi himself uses, for example, in his engraving of the Pantheon. So here we see the case of the Pantheon with two other books, and in the exhibition in general, we have many other books that kind of either contextualize or just show this sort of the sort of main issues that Piranesi in his approach to architecture, and just gives a little more context. So for example, here we see this as a guidebook that shows both the facade and a cross section as well, the Pantheon. So in this, though this might seem like a very kind of flat image, a very, somewhat familiar as a kind of architectural blueprint, actually, we can see that the space itself, through light, through perspective, through this massive dome, is actually incredibly immersive. And so in that way, it's very much like a map, in that we can really enter the space of the buildings, of the city, whatever that might be. And so actually in development right now is a project called the Virtual Piranesi, in which you can actually explore and step into Piranesi's 18th century Pantheon. So I'll just show this very briefly. This sort of, it's in development, so this is kind of an early prototype. It's the outside. And this, for example, entering into the building. It kind of recreates that space, that kind of immersive space, and all of the worlds that we've seen thus far. And but actually, quite literally, we can enter into it. So with that, I'll just quickly just go through just some of the other really cool things that there's not enough time to talk about everything in the exhibition, but here are just some of the other cases, just to give you a sense of the other types of things that are in the exhibition. Here is an image of the Ionic order and all of the magnificent examples of the Ionic order and Ionic capitals of columns, with a kind of ancient example of that that's also on loan from the Columbia Museum of Art. Here also an Etruscan head that is on loan from the Columbia Museum of Art, but this kind of fantastical reconstruction of a Roman street. More supplementary books here as well, and just travel. We have more maps, more views, guidebooks, as well as stereoscope views, postcards, and other kinds of travel ephemera. And and here we see a stereoscope on the right, if you can see that. And another one. And so with that, I'll conclude the tour, but we welcome any questions you may have, and thank you so much. And feel free to ask them by turning your microphone off or in the chat. Thank you.
Hey, I wondered how long the exhibit would be up.
Oh, it's until October.
Oh, fabulous. Great, thanks.
Is there a printed catalog?
No, there's not a printed catalog of the exhibit. We are in the process of creating to make things more confusing, a digital exhibit, which will imitate and preserve the physical exhibit.
Got a question from Bryce. With COVID, I'm assuming no, but might there be opportunities to bring a school group?
Well, maybe. Zoe has led an in-person tour, and we had a maximum attendance limit at 9. There would be ways to arrange something. The thing to do would be to email the Irvin department. There's an email address somewhere online, or there's also the Digital Piranesi email account, Digital Piranesi, one word, @gmail.com. It could be possible, especially with a smaller group.
I put it in the chat, the email, digitalpiranesi@gmail.com.
Bryce teaches Latin and looks like it would be an incredible experience for them. So hopefully that will work out.
Oh yeah, that would be great. I think that we are limiting groups in the gallery to 10 at a time, if that, and so, but depending on, we can figure something out because there are 2 galleries, so we can make it work.
Zoe has offered to do tours in Latin.
No. In Italian,
In Italian, definitely, but sprinklings of Latin.
That might
Okay.
scare my students away.
So feel free to share your questions in the chat, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and ask one question, Jeannie and Zoe. I guess for each of you, what's your favorite item in the exhibit?
I'll say the huge ichnographia, the framed image that I started with, because we have 2. We thought that the one that was framed was a copy. It's in a huge, heavy frame that we've since modernized, and now it's behind plexiglass instead of glass. So the image, the print isn't being damaged by the light, but it was too heavy to even look at when it was downstairs. When it was brought up for the exhibit, Zoe and I stood looking at it and slowly realized there's no way this is a copy. This is a print. We can see the indentation on the paper from the copper plates. We have another copy in one of the volumes of the complete works. So I want to know how many places in the world have not 1, but 2 copies of Piranesi's most giant creative map. And I think that that's, I don't know, I was just astounded when I realized that.
Well, for me, I think it has to be still the tomb of Cecilia Metella. I just love the way that Piranesi recounts his journey to discovering the mystery of Roman engineering, how he goes to the ruins every day, maybe identify with it too much personally, being a researcher and having also studied ancient fragments and books. But just, and we couldn't show this, but there are, Piranesi was obsessed with this tomb. He had, I think, over 10 images of this tomb. It just, he just wanted to understand it so badly. And I really relate to that as a researcher. So I think that's still my favorite.
And Zoe has a very dramatic rendition of a condensed version of those annotations performed
Yes.
on YouTube in Italian, that I think is Grammy worthy. Or whatever the
I
Italian.
can put a link to that, actually. I'll put a link to that in the chat. But yes, I do interpret the role of Piranesi as best I can. Reading his Italian and sort of in that process of, him discovering the mystery of this tomb. So I'll put a link to that in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you all both for sharing. The next question, would this exhibit be interesting to architects, and has any information been sent to them?
I have been in touch with, someone whose name I don't remember. Adrian McGillis, I think, who is the president of the local chapter of the AIA. And they brought their group last year in the before COVID times, and they were very interested. So I have reached out to her. My short answer is yes, it should be interesting to architects. If anybody has an interest in the history of architecture, I think that they would be very interested.
And let's see, Patrick Scott says, for a long time, the big frame, map was on the wall, I think in the main entrance area of Thomas Cooper Library, and then on level 5. Pierce
Yes.
Scott says, I'm an architect and I find this very interesting. Christian says, do y'all work with any art conservators? If so, how?
Lauren Henderson is our on-staff, on-site conservator. And so she has done a lot of just amazing, meticulous work, relaxing creases on some of the pages you might have noticed have little lines or indentations on them. She's managed to flatten those in. So yes. But any other conservators outside of South Carolina haven't looked at this collection, but we have worked with them with other materials, absolutely.
Graham says, you teased a story about the printing in French, a language Piranesi didn't speak. If there's time, I'd like to hear the rest.
Sure. Okay, two things that I want to say. Art historians like to present Piranesi as being kind of crazy and not well educated. That his Italian was weird and imperfect. Well, whatever. He was also a Venetian living in Rome. Italian wasn't standardized until the 19th century, so give him a break. They criticize his knowledge of Greek and sometimes Latin. He didn't know French, that's true. Okay. But the point that the more academic point to make is that Piranesi was really the organizer of a big group of skilled laborers. So his print shop was not just his own individual artist's studio. He was working with a team of artists that often included his children. And so he probably didn't write those, well, he definitely didn't write those annotations himself. But whether he can be held responsible for their contents, I think, is subject for debate. I would say yes, because he was catering to the French market, which was becoming much more interested in architectural history and architectural theory in the 1770s. So it's a kind of complicated history that speaks to both the market concerns, history of language, and also his own means of production as a printmaker.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Graham. If you have more questions, feel free to add those to the chat. I'll ask another question. Do you think Piranesi would be excited about the internet and digital technology?
Absolutely. I think that's really what he was trying to achieve in all of these numerous annotations and links with his other works, with other images, with other maps, these kind of constellation of networks. I really think he absolutely would have loved the internet and probably done something amazing with it.
I think so too, but I'll say I really think that Piranesi was dedicated to the printed page and the bound book in a way that I think probably inspired him. Like, I think he enjoyed the constraints of trying to force loads of information onto just one single sheet. So at the same time that I think he would have just had a field day with digital design, I think that he was also really committed to the possibilities that the printed page afforded him. He would have done it all.
Okay. We have a question from Bryce. You mentioned that Piranesi was a Venetian, and did he have an architectural work from Venice, and I don't want to mispronounce these, Pisa or Florence in addition to Rome? Okay, can you read those, Zoe?
Yes, yeah, no. This Pisa or Florence, which is where I'm from. So
not the Florence down the highway, which is where I'm from.
It's no Florence, Italy.
So the question, I think, is whether he had architectural works of Venice or Pisa or Florence. And no, he moved to Rome, and he really moved to Rome. And Paestum was the only, one of very few times that he illustrated anything outside of Rome. There were a few other, well, there's some in Naples,
Yeah,
right?
there
Just-
are a few views in Naples, as well as there are many Venetian elements to the prisons, for example, and a lot of his other imaginary views and caprices. There are definitely nautical elements, for example, from Venice. There's also the lions of St. Mark's in one of the prisons. And so you can see that his Venetian background coming into things, but not necessarily, he didn't actually make views of those cities though.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's see. Looks like we have another question. MC Escher had to have been highly influenced by Piranesi's imaginary worlds. The Columbia Museum of Art just opened an amazing exhibit where you will see other imaginary staircases. Escher lived in Italy for 10 years and used many of those scenes in his work. Thank you, ladies.
I agree. I think there's a lot of similarity between certain images from the imaginary prisons and MC Escher, for sure. I didn't know that Escher lived in Italy for 10 years. That might explain it, where it started.
Okay, I'll have one more question and we will wrap it up. How did Piranesi produce such detailed images and how did he produce so many of them?
I think I answered part of that before with talking about his kind of workshop, his big staff that he controlled. And Zoe, I'll hand over the other part of the question to you since you know a lot more about etching.
Well, yes, it's incredibly difficult. I will say that. I have tried my hand at copperplate engraving, and when you try, you realize how amazing Piranesi's work really is. So, but in terms of how etching actually works, you would take an instrument to carve into the metal plate. And so these could be either very delicate lines for the very soft details, but also the museum of it's the Institute for the Graphic Arts in Rome actually has all of his copper plates. And there's a catalog that reproduces images of them. And some of them are just incredibly sculptural. It's just amazing. They pop off the page. And so in some ways, they're almost like sculpture, as well as just etching or even drawing. And so yeah, how he, yes, he had help, and a lot of these prints were collaborative enterprises. But he also had his own print shop, and so I think that was also allowed him to really produce as much as he could, having kind of funding his own print shop. And not having to rely on other kinds of patronage schemes or anyone else to sort of produce his work. But yeah, the level of detail is astonishing, and it's just it's amazing. So.
Awesome. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap the program. Beth, if you're ready.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the program, and Jeannie and Zoe, thank you both so much for this view into Piranesi's worlds. We also want to thank each of you for coming tonight and tell you about some other virtual events that we've got coming up in February and March that might be of interest to you. And again, these are just a few of the many programs we provide for our Friends of University Library members. The next event is going to be Wednesday, February 24th from noon to 1, and it's called Creating and Restoring the South Caroliniana Library. University Libraries and USC Press will host author John Bryan, architect Jay White, and University of South Carolina archivist Elizabeth West for a conversation about the history and restoration of the South Caroliniana Library. And then this is going to be really fun. On Wednesday, March 17th at 6 p.m., it's called Fitzgerald, Gatsby, and the Making of the Jazz Era. So the Irvin Department of Rare Books and Special Collections will feature literature and culture of the 1920s. Curator Michael Weisenberg will share a selection of high points regarding the life and work of F. Scott Fitzgerald. That's a hard one. I can't say it. Anyway, the talk will also include materials from Fitzgerald's contemporaries, including his wife Zelda and his editor Max Perkins and his friend Ernest Hemingway and many others. And then again on March 29th at 6 p.m., you can join curator Zoe Langer for a discussion on the book Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Now, you can find links for each of these events as well as other information about how to become a member of our Friends of University Libraries in the chat box. And we thank you again for joining us and hope you all have a great night. Bye-bye. Stumbled a couple of times.
Thank you so much for a wonderful lesson.
We are glad you enjoyed it.
Okay.